Linda Thielfoldt here with a Longarm Lifeline. Today we're talking about stippling. It's been my experience as I've taught across the country that students struggle with actually doing stippling, which is a really common motif that we put on a lot of quilts. So today I want to talk about some tips that can help you visualize what you're supposed to do and actually stitch in one continuous path a really nice line of stippling. So let's get started. Today, you may have noticed I have some M&Ms here. And you may be thinking, Linda, what in the world do M&Ms have to do with stippling? Well, this is a really great practice tip. And what I ask all my students to do is get a package of M&Ms. Here I have them laid out on the quilt, but in your practice session you want to use a piece of paper, that works fine, and a pen. And what I'm challenging you to do is to just travel around the M&Ms in a continuous line. And you may have noticed I'm right back here crossing over where I just was. And you know, the quilt police are going to tell you that you can't cross over a line of stippling. But you know what, in my world, you can just keep going. It's perfectly okay. So we're going to stipple all through these M&Ms. And what I'm really using the M&Ms for is just a visual, so that you have that nice little circular object in the center of that stipple thread path that you're taking. And the best part is when you're all done with your practice, you get to eat the M&Ms. So let's get to some stippling. We're going to get rid of our M&Ms, and one of the things that I want to mention is that all of your stippling may not be this particular size. So let's do some experimentation here with the machine, and you can actually see it in action. So we're ready to start. I've brought my bobbin thread up to the top, and I'm just going to take a couple little locking stitches in place, and now we're going to start stippling. And if you remember, we were talking about those M&Ms, so if you can envision an M&M being in the center, more or less, of where I'm going. Now, as you're working your way through, you may come to a dead end. That happens often, and that's perfectly okay. Where I always try and end up if I hit a dead end is I always try to get to a seam, because I know I can always tie off and start again. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So as I'm stitching, I'm just making my way through this area. This might be a block or a background around applique, whatever it is. I'm trying to change direction, keeping a nice rounded edge when I do change direction. And the last thing you want to think about is being consistent. You want to have some consistency. So you don't want to make some really, really small little loops and then, you know, some really big ones. That's not going to look very nice. You want to make sure that you maintain a consistent size. And that's where the M&M practice really comes in handy. So one of the things I like to tell my students when they're practicing is practice changing size. So you can see I'm getting a little smaller here. Now I'm going to get really, really small. And you may be hearing the machine is kind of, you know, the stitch regulator is engaged and the rounded edges of my stipples aren't quite so perfect. And you might want to try what I like to do, and that is where I take it off of stitch regulation and run it in manual or constant speed mode. So I've switched my machine over to manual mode and I've reduced the speed, and that allows me to do some really, really tiny stippling. Now Gammill has an accessory that can be very, very helpful when you're doing this micro stippling, and it's called extended drive handles. I don't have them mounted on here, but they allow you to get your hands really close to the work and give you a little bit more control. Now you may be saying, well Linda, that's really well and good, but I still struggle with navigating through the process, and I get lost. So I'm going to give you one last tip. I like to draw just kind of an overall navigation path. And then I'm going to stipple along that path. But it's just kind of a road map. Think of it as a road map as you navigate through that particular area of your quilt. It's just a travel path. And this can be really helpful for you, especially if you're a beginner and you struggle with, you know, dead ends or crossing back over an area that you've already done. And you can see you can't really tell that that was part of my stippling process, but yet it does lead you through the area rather nicely. I hope you'll find these stippling tips helpful as you continue your quilting journey. I'm Thielfoldt, and remember, Gammill helps you realize your dream.